Hello, everyone. Welcome to the final episode of the algorithmic pattern talks in this series. We've had some really fantastic talks over the last month or so about weaving, wire bending, heritage algorithms, generative justice, carnatic music, live coding, and now the final talk will be about juggling. Which I think will be a really fitting end because it is so mathematical and so physical. It kind of speaks to a lot of aspects of the theme. So yeah, algorithmic patterns, they're technological, but also cultural and creative. And looking at all these different kinds of patterns in culture, I think has some interesting things to say about the future of technology, what it could be, how it could be more culturally grounded, more open to change, more creative, and so on. So after this series, watch out for more events, maybe some symposia coming up soon. So if you're interested in contributing to something like a symposium on algorithmic pattern, please get in touch with me, alex@slab.org, and I'll be happy to hear from you, see what ideas you've got. Get involved. Yeah, today's talk will be with Bekah Smith, who is waiting in the wings. I'll just introduce you to the stream, Bekah. Welcome. Yeah, thanks for being with us. You've got a bit of a presentation for us, I understand. So maybe I'll just leave you to it and introduce yourself a little bit, say where you're from and everything, and I'll jump in to help facilitate the Q&A afterwards. But yeah, please do say hello in the chat if you're watching live, and share your questions and stuff as we go, and at the end if you prefer. Okay, I'll leave it with you, Bekah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. I'm really excited to be here, and thanks for hosting and organizing this and inspiring all of the stuff you're about to see. I'm really excited to present about juggling and about Siteswaps. And so thanks for being here. Thanks for having me. And yeah, feel free to pull up the slides. I'll talk a little bit about myself as I go through the slides. And yeah, so this presentation is going to be about algorithms for juggling, and I'm always excited to talk about juggling, but I'm particularly always excited to talk about algorithms and patterns, the math of juggling. So it's a very niche topic that you don't get to talk about very often. So feel free to move to the next slide. And I'll just share a little bit about myself. I'm a current master's student at the CU Atlas Institute studying creative technology and design. I also have a background in clown school and in business and music and math. And I've been a professional juggler since 2008. And it's been a fun, wild ride. And my specialty that you're about to see is all about, well, one of my specialties is about Siteswap and the math of juggling. I've also been trained in clown and unicycle, and lots of other fun stuff. So a little bit about me. Feel free to follow me and look at some videos. So just a little bit of a path for us for this talk. I've just outlined my goals for what to talk about, but I'm also flexible and open to whatever people want to hear about. So feel free to put some questions or some ideas or discussion into the chat. And Alex, I'm sure you'll jump in and let me know if there's anything that we want to talk about there. But basically, I want to explain broadly what Siteswap is, not too in depth, but I will show some resources for learning more about Siteswap. I just want to give some context, a little bit of a foothold for the videos that are going to come later. And what I've done there is showed how patterns are generated and transformed using Siteswap algorithms. And then the videos, I think, will be the most fun part. I'm excited. I always think it's fun to see the juggling patterns and see the motion. So, and a special treat for today, all of the patterns that you're going to see in the videos are derived from today's date, 6/28/2022. It's a number. We're going to juggle it. So I'm excited for that, and we'll have some time for discussion, hopefully. So yeah. And on the next slide, little bit of a thanks. These are folks who have been teaching me, spreading knowledge about Siteswap and really pushing the limits. So thanks to Danny Schultz, Danny Sanchez, Bappo, who was on the ground inventing Siteswap, Gandini Juggling and the Institute of Jugglology, Club Passing, and Santi Malabari are great people to look at if you want to see more about what the performance aspect of Siteswap looks like. And then Madison area jugglers, Nathan Peterson, Christian Helvling, and Julie for all of their work in compiling all of this information. It's actually really amazing. I just want to pause and just give some gratitude about the juggling community and about Siteswaps. It's actually a growing art form. And so right now we're seeing more and more people utilizing Siteswap knowledge. And so as I get into talking about it, I think it's just fun context to know that this is a growing thing, that there's just more and more research and more entertainment and art that people are making using this, this formula. So great. Here's what Siteswap is. Siteswap is a series of numbers and letters that describes a juggling pattern. So each one of these is an example of a valid Siteswap pattern that you could throw in the air. So in fact, that first pattern right there, 3, it looks like this. That's Siteswap 3, that's all it is. And then each of those underneath it is a Siteswap with varying amounts of objects. And basically each number corresponds to a throw. And the number, how big it is, or the letter, corresponds to the number of throws that will happen before that ball gets thrown next. So a 3 is going to take 3 beats before it gets thrown again, and a beat is a throw. So 1, 2, 3, and then I would throw that ball again. And just to briefly show it one more time, you can sort of follow the red ball and look at the beats and see that it's thrown every 3 beats. 1, 2, 3, throw again. So that's Siteswap. Now, I think it's important to share that although it looks like these are just random strings of numbers, it's actually, not all strings of numbers and letters are valid Siteswaps. I'm actually not sure the ratio of how many, strings of characters are valid and what aren't. That's a very fascinating thing we should look into after this talk, I think. But they're not all valid. And so I'm going to share a little bit about how you know whether or not the Siteswap is valid and what that means. But as we get into talking about today's date, I'm just really excited that it is a valid Siteswap. So more about that as we go. And just a moment to shout out to a resource here, siteswap.org. I'm not going to go too in depth about all that Siteswap is and all that it means, but if you want to learn more, there's a great resource here from Nathan Peterson that has history articles. You can see what the Siteswaps look like with a really cool interactive generator. So there's lots of resources there. So yeah, on to the next slide, please. And yeah, valid Siteswaps. So we looked at a couple of them there, 3, 4, 4, 1. There's certainly a very mathematical definition of what makes a string of numbers and letters valid or not. My way of thinking about it as applying these Siteswaps into juggling that I'm doing in the air, I think about it in terms of a string of numbers that allows for no collisions of objects. For example, there's no situation where 2 objects are going to land in my hand at the same time, and there's not going to be any gaps where my hand doesn't have anything to throw, unless those are accounted for numerically. So what I mean to say is there's patterns that have a 0 in it, and that would correspond to a moment in time where there's no ball and your hand is at rest for that beat. But it's described in the number, so there will be a 0 there. So, and another example is a string of numbers 432 is not a valid Siteswap. And I'll try to explain more about that, but basically 4 is going to be thrown straight up, and it's a little bit of a higher number, and then a 3 comes right after it. It's going to be handled 3 beats later, and those are going to land at the same time into this hand. Now there's a way to notate that I would throw both of those at the same time, but in this hypothetical Siteswap 4-3-2, it's not notated that there's 2 balls that would be thrown at the same time. That's actually notated with brackets. So there's no way for that Siteswap to work mathematically. And there's ways to validate that on your hands. A friend showed me how to validate a Siteswap with a CD, a fun way to make a little carousel, or on paper. So I'm going to show the method on paper on the next slide, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about these other fun methods another time. So on the next slide, here's a basic juggle. 3-3-3 is one way to think about it because there's 3 balls, but its shortest non-repeating sequence is 3. And down below, I've repeated all the 3s on for a little bit, and I've drawn the path to show where the ball's going to land. So you can see by each arrow, they weave in and out of each other. To me, it looks like a braid. So you can, sort of imagine 3 strands of yarn, but you only have 2 hands to deal with them at all times. And so you can see here from the, and I wish the animations were here, but you'll see those in a minute. But you can see that every position is accounted for after the first 3 throws. And so if there were any gaps that weren't accounted for numerically, then we would know that this is not a valid Siteswap. So I feel like that's a pretty broad explanation of what Siteswap is. I'm happy to share more with anybody. I think Wikipedia also does a really great job. The resources people have put there are really great at explaining Siteswap. So yeah, moving on from there, I'm excited to get to the fun stuff about today's date. So after a little bit of experimentation with various forms of this date, 06-28-22, that wasn't a valid Siteswap. 6-28-2022. Oh yeah, okay, that's part of a valid Siteswap. And so that gave me a fun way to sort of explore and show how you can use Siteswaps and the application of how you can use them to create some interesting patterns. So today's date, if you add the number 2 or the letter A actually is like the same as the number 10, but it would be confusing to have those 2 digits as a 10. So we switch to letters as you go above the number 9. So anyway, these are 2 variations on today's date. And so it's pretty fun for me. I don't know how nerdy you guys out there are about numbers, but I certainly am. And so to find out that today's date is a valid Siteswap feels really, really fun. So these links here, I don't think we're able to go there on the stream, but if anybody goes there on your own device, those are fun to look at. It's interesting to know that not all valid Siteswaps look interesting. Not all of them are even like really possible from a juggler perspective. The human body is a little bit limited on what it can actually do. There's a limit to how high I can throw. And so not all patterns are interesting or possible, but this one is particularly funny because the way the numbers work out, every other number in the top variation, 6-28-20-22, 2, every other number is a 2. And so if and when you check out this video, you'll see it's a little bit funny that the right hand is juggling like crazy and doing all kinds of high complicated throws, and the left hand is just hanging out and just doing a very repetitive sequence. So you'll see that in the videos in a minute, but just a funny thing. It's not always possible to tell from a series of numbers if this is an interesting Siteswap, if it's going to look cool, if it's going to be fun to juggle or not. But we got a little bit lucky. There's some really fun variations that I'm excited to show today. I feel like could be a good time to pause if there's anything fun, Alex, that people want to talk about or any questions at the moment. Otherwise, we can keep going to the next.
Yeah, I think just people saying they're really into this and excited. No questions yet.
Awesome.
I mean, I have questions if you fancy taking one there.
Sure. I feel like it might be nice for a little break. There's been a lot of numbers so far. So
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm just really interested in this. On one hand, Siteswaps that are invalid, you can't juggle them, and other side, whether they're valuable or not, interesting, which really makes me think about an amazing researcher called Margaret Bowden, I think, who writes about creativity. And that's basically what she says creativity is. It's sort of creating a space where things are possible or not, but then also having aspects which, whether things you find are valuable or not, but then also the possibility of breaking out of that space. Which leads to my question. I mean, that's a really poor summary of her theory, but theory of creativity. But yeah, I suppose if someone gave you an invalid site swap and said you must do this, otherwise, or something like you must do this invalid site swap, then I'll give you free lasagna for the rest of your life, or something like that. And so you really felt compelled to do that. How would you do it? What kind of, would you change how juggling is done? Would you like somehow, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a fun question. To win all that lasagna, I would certainly work really hard. And in a way, I sort of messed with it a little bit here by adding the 2 and the A to the end. So that's one way that you could sort of get there, is by figuring out where you could insert a number to make it valid.
Yeah.
You could also potentially be adding brackets if the number that you're being forced to juggle for lasagna is creating a collision where there's 2 balls landing in the hand at the same time. And if you could get creative with brackets, perhaps that would be a way to really make it work. But I also think that at the very end of the day, there would be some numbers that you really just couldn't do at all. So
what if you did? What if you like added an extra arm or changed the laws of gravity? Would that help? Or
yeah, also a good question. So that's really fun. Those would all be great scenarios to juggle in, and sort of something I'm going to touch on actually. All of these site swaps, if you look at a number like 6, 28, 20, 22, I can use that site swap for one hand. I can use it for 2 hands, for 3 hands, for 4 hands, and actually some of the variations we're going to show are with 6 hands. So, but that doesn't actually change whether or not it's valid. And I think somebody else would be able to speak more to things like knot theory and, just thinking about braiding and how it just will mathematically work or not. And so, and then as far as if I were on the moon and I had more time for that ball to come back down, that would allow me to do I would be able to do site swaps with a higher throw. Maybe I could throw an F on the moon, but the actual structure of the site swap would remain the same.
Okay. So no lasagna then, sorry. Anyway, I'll let you continue with your presentation. Stop talking about lasagna.
Awesome. I'm hungry now. That's amazing. Thank you, Alex, for that question. Yeah, really fun questions. I think there's a lot of research about Siteswap that goes beyond my understanding as well. So I'm gonna love to hear some discussion as well if there happen to be jugglers here as well, and some of the other resources are gonna give us some inspiration. Juggling on the moon for lasagna. Okay, feel free to go to the next slide, Alex. And oh yes, here you'll get to see this in animation a little bit later, but I've drawn out today's date, one of those variations, and you can see the path of all of those juggling balls, sort of as a braid, sort of strange braid. And I think it's nice to visualize the 0 here, where there's no ball landing there. And so it's effectively skipped, but as we go into the videos, you'll see me using a snap in place of a 0 as a way to hold that time. So it's kind of a fun, unique pattern that it has a 0 in here. And it also has 2s. We'll talk about 2s as part of transformations. You want to go on to the next slide, please? Yeah, transformations. So starting with the number 628202222, which is a period 8 Siteswap, which I haven't really talked about, but that means it's got 8 digits, 8 throws. It almost feels like you're in 4/4 time. If there are musicians out there, it's kind of like a really nice pattern. And then I've applied some transformations that you'll get to see, and I've sort of summarized the way that those transformations work. Essentially, you can add objects by adding numbers. You can lower the number of objects that you're juggling by removing, either by subtracting 1 from all of the numbers in the Siteswap, or you take the period, which is 8 in this case, and you subtract that from 1 throw. You can swap numbers. You'll get to see that. And then there's also a Preshak transformation, which is a really fun special thing that was first defined by Christoph Preshak in a math paper about this new kind of transformation that you can do with Siteswap. So I'll be showing some of those. And it also seems like a good time to talk about just how the transformations, how I do them. It's not just random that I'm just kind of picking, oh, I'll swap these 2 numbers. Oh, I'll add a ball, things like that. There are some just interesting qualities of different numbers, and it depends on how many hands you're using to juggle that Siteswap. But some common interesting numbers are 0s, 1s, and 2s. And then there are some higher numbers that are just more possible than others. For example, a 6 is easier to juggle than a 5. And there's different reasons for that, but essentially, as I'm applying these transformations, I have a goal with what sort of pattern I want to create. Is this a pattern where we're standing side by side? And so I'm going to try and make these numbers that I know are going to work really well in close proximity, or am I creating a pattern where it's 2 people and we're juggling together far apart, and we're juggling this with 4 hands, and we need high throws so that we can high numbers so that we can throw them further. So as I'm applying these transformations, it's thoughtful, but it is also a little bit fun, and just a little bit to what I think you were talking about earlier, Alex, that you can have constraints that really give you places to be creative. And so this whole exploration of today's date as a Siteswap really gave us some ways to be creative within those constraints, and especially with some of these interesting numbers. We had a lot of fun in particular with 2s in this project. You'll see myself and the other jugglers experiment with a 2 can be either an active 2 where it's just toss a little bit, or since it's actually going back to the same hand, that's just the nature of a 2. It's going to land in the same place. You don't actually need to throw it at all. You can just hold that ball. So some really interesting qualities that have come out of this particular series of numbers, especially the 2s and the 0s. So yeah, on to the next slide, please. Just a little example. You'll see this animated in a second, but just showing the transformations and the end result. And the bottom is the pattern that we're actually going to be juggling. 2p, 2, 5, 2, 0, 1p, 2, 2. And All of the patterns are going to be period 8. So again, it's a little bit like 4/4 time. Some of them are very rhythmic. We've added a percussive element to them. So yeah, on to the next slide again, please. And I think, yeah, from here, I think we're ready to show the video, if you don't mind, Alex. And it's about 3 minutes long. I may be able to narrate if my bandwidth can keep up with the stream. But yeah, as we go through here, I'm excited to show off some of the more abstract applications of Siteswaps, as well as some more really, fundamental juggling applications of the Siteswap. So this is the very first variation, just a basic using the Siteswap with 2 hands only, and then starting to show some of the transformations. And it's going to be toss juggling at the beginning of the video. And some other things to know about how this works. There's a couple different methods of how the Siteswaps are shared among different people that gets really interesting. So if we have 4 hands that we're using to juggle, we get to choose, okay, do we start with my right hand and then your right hand and then my left hand and then your left hand? And here, as we have 6 hands, there's a lot of choices to be made, but there's some methods on how the Siteswaps will be symmetric or asymmetric. And most of these patterns are symmetric, where all jugglers are going through the entire series of numbers. So both jugglers are throwing 8 throws before they get back to the beginning of the sequence. But in this case, as with many of these patterns, we are starting at different places in the pattern. So I start, for example, at the beginning, and the other juggler starts halfway through. This is an area where I start to get really excited about what's possible with Siteswap, and shout out to Danny Sanchez and Daniel Schultz for showing me a lot of this, what they call table juggling. And a little bit later, you'll see some patty swap. And these are ways to just take the gravity out of juggling, put it on the table, and just get really, really mathy about it. So here we're tracing the path of the Siteswaps, and this is an idea of my own I call sand swap. And we've tried it a couple different ways, both with moving the balls to show how they would go in the air if we were actually throwing them, and showing that it is a valid Siteswap with all of the balls returning to the same place. And here we're able to make it even a little bit more abstract without using any juggling objects at all. Which is quite fun for me. So a little bit of sand swap there for you, some fun research. And then I think the last one that we have here is patty swap, which I would encourage anyone to try. This is, I think, an area where there's room for creativity. The way that the numbers show us that the hand order will work out, and there will be a hand available for me to slap at that time. It gives a little bit of a constraint. You have to work within that timing and that rhythm. But then after that, and even here you can see there's some choices that you can make about how if you're doing sand, what does a 2 look like? There's, I think, a lot of room for more exploration in some of these areas, pseudo juggling. So those are some variations on today's date. It was a lot of fun to do, and thanks to Nick and Ty and Chris for juggling with me and pushing sand around and doing patty cake. It was really fun to dive into those patterns. When Alex and I were talking about doing this talk, I realized that I actually didn't have a lot of current media and videos and things about the exploration of this sort of site swap and site swap between 2 or 3 people. And so this was a great opportunity to sort of catalog this process and just show some fun variations. There's a lot more that can be done with this. We really just went with some variations with these eight types here. There's so much more that you can do. There's a lot more that people are doing that's really fun. Um, but yeah, I think there's maybe just one more slide that we could go back to, Alex, if you don't mind headed back over there. Or actually, I don't know who's running slides. Thank you for keeping me on track back there. Um, so for reference, yeah, these are all the patterns that we just did. Um, and on the next slide, yeah, what's next? Just a little bit of some fun looking into the future of Siteswap. Maybe get some creative energy flowing for some discussion here, but just a little bit about what's next for the exploration of Siteswap. So first of all, there's a lot of variations that you can do with the same pattern. And we explored a little bit of those, but to go a little bit further, we can really do a lot more with hand order than what was shown even in this video. So a lot of the patterns that we just showed are considered vanilla, which is right, left, right, left, right, left. And there's a lot more that you can do that would be fun to explore in terms of alternating the hand order, something like a paradiddle, which would be right, left, right, right, left, right, left, left. And the same um, algorithms for Siteswap would still remain true. The same sequences of numbers would be valid or not valid, but then you would be able to take that Siteswap and it would look a lot different. If you were choosing to throw two right hands in a row and then go back to your left, the same number 3 would look different in one spot in that pattern than the other because of the hand order. And another fun area is thinking of hands in terms of inside and outside, which is being explored quite a lot right now, and there's just so much more to be done with it. So shout outs to some fun folks on Instagram who are pioneering right now a lot of variations on side-by-side juggling with inside, outside, inside, and variations on that. So on Instagram, check out Club Passing and Santi Malabari. They're doing some fun stuff there. And then there's also a lot that can be done with the number of jugglers. Um, some some things that would be fun to try would be, a larger number of jugglers where each person has their own unique site swap, where each is compatible so that I can be juggling one thing and then all 10 people are juggling different patterns that combine together. Um, and again, fun variations on hand order that can go there. Um, it's, I think, interesting that uh, most jugglers are using site swaps with a period of up to 6 or maybe even period 8 site swaps, but a lot of them are more like 3 digits long, like 441 or 531. And those patterns are repeating. So if I'm juggling a trick and I'm doing a 441, and I might be repeating that same site swap, but it's a small period. And so I think that there's a lot more to be done with a longer period site swaps. It's a lot more to keep track of in your head of what beat am I on. It would be maybe a bit like being in 12/4 time playing music, but there's a lot more to be explored there. I've found it fascinating to use site swaps as a method to teach juggling to beginners, especially at stages where people can become frustrated with the learning process of juggling and how you have to be bending over and picking up juggling balls off the floor, and that's not fun for anybody's back. And so I think there's some fun ways to utilize some of the pseudo juggling and site swaps that you saw in this video and how those can be valuable for people who are learning to juggle, because you can really challenge yourself to understand how the juggling pattern works and how the balls will move around each other and take away the kind of overwhelming aspect of gravity that can be so difficult as you're learning. And it really just can help with people's hand-eye coordination skills as they're learning. Um, Another interesting area of exploration we talked a little bit earlier, if you're juggling on the moon, you could potentially have more site swaps that are available to you because you could throw higher numbers and still be able to throw consistently with less gravity. So maybe, here on Earth, I can, on a really good day, juggle 7 balls here on Earth. Maybe on the moon, maybe I could have a shot at juggling 9 or 11 or 12 maybe. But one fun area of exploration right now is this area of VR and how that enables us to have realistic physics generators that allow us to juggle with different gravities. And so there's a fun app by Benjamin Outram, who created Planet Juggle. And that's just, I think there's another example as well out there, but Planet Juggle is one, I think, fun example of where you can realistically experiment with what is it like to juggle on Mars or Pluto, and you could theoretically do site swaps in this program. It's very realistic. You can juggle and do realistic patterns. So, and then the last area of exploration that I'll sort of share is just the way that the numbers can be used for pseudo juggling to be even more abstract. I think SandSwap is just the beginning of a way that these numbers could be used for generative art pieces, as well as the way that they could be programmed. For example, a robot that a spherical robot, for example, that could be programmed to follow the path needed to juggle a site swap. And so I think that there's some really fun examples there, potentially even aerial robots like drones that I think that there's some fun exploration there in terms of the artistic and entertainment value of site swap. So with that, that is about all of the talking that I have planned. And so I am excited now to hear what's going on in the chat and what's going on in your head, Alex. What else should we talk about?
Yeah, thanks so much, Bekah. That was such a lovely whistle-stop tour of Siteswap and juggling. There's lots of links to explore. We'll put them in the description of the YouTube video at some point after the live stream and on the website and stuff. But yeah, lots of questions I have anyway. So where should we start? So I've already asked about lasagna. Yeah, I suppose what I'm really curious is what juggling really feels like. I think when people are doing difficult things, they either talk about kind of losing track of time, sort of being in this sort of state of not really being fully aware, or otherwise completely the opposite, like feeling completely in touch with exactly what they're doing and really in control. Which of those kind of two descriptions would you put juggling in, do you say?
Ooh. Wow, that's a fun question. I think it can be both. I think that frame of mind that you talked about, you can get into where you're not even thinking. I've heard that called flow state in terms of juggling, and people have taken flow arts to an amazing extreme as well. And so that can be a feeling that I have when I'm juggling, and that can happen when I'm juggling a site swap. Let's say I have a period 5 site swap, and that's going to feel a bit like a paradiddle, where it starts on this side, and then I have to repeat it on the other side. And that's the sort of pattern where I felt in the past, like if my body is understanding it, my brain doesn't need to, and my brain is checked out, and I'm just able to somehow track that. But then there's definitely other times where it's just you are thinking about every single throw and really you really have to keep track of each and every one, and even counting out loud, especially in group patterns. I would say that's a common thing, to just really be counting out loud while you're doing it, so you stay on track and stay on rhythm and know where you're at in the pattern. So
yeah, I love the sort of connection with rhythm and sort of with music and choreographic and other time-based arts. And I think the word paradiddle is used a lot in percussion as well, right? So that way of moving between left and right with your hands to do drumming. Just wondering what other, like you talked about braiding quite a lot. There's clearly very close connections with textile arts. Are there any kind of metaphors and connections? And more broadly, is there when juggling, when jugglers have more than one hobby, are jugglers often braiders, for example? Do they kind of connect across these?
Oh, that's a fun question. I think there is a lot of crossover rhythmically, musically. There's a lot of crossover. As far as other metaphors, the crossovers between music and knots are some of the bigger ones. I think that there's probably some others out there that I'm not as familiar with. Like state diagrams are one aspect of Siteswaps that are a little bit beyond my comprehension still, but I think that there's some correlations to some mathematical theory there that might be fun for you, Alex. But I think the big ones are the ones that I've talked about. Yeah, and I think that there's just so much that you can do with music as well, and the way you can use you could hear some of those patterns that we did where you can actually hear the rhythm of it, and so there's a lot of exploration there.
Okay, so here's a project idea from Cayman from the chat. A Siteswap pattern generator, oblique strategy style. So I think they're referring to Brian Eno's card deck, where it kind of gives you thinking points for getting beyond blocks when you're working on particularly music. But I guess this is probably something that's been explored quite a lot in juggling, like generating Siteswaps programmatically.
To some extent, I think Kamen is on an awesome path, though. Thanks for saying that. You may be interested in checking out a resource that I've used called passist.org. And it does have a generating feature on there. So thanks to Christian Helbling for making that site. And so what you can do is you can give it certain parameters, and it will tell you all of the possible Siteswaps that fit those parameters. So I could, for example, tell it that I'm looking for a Siteswap that includes the sequence 628 plus anything else. And on this particular site, you need to tell it what period you're looking for. Am I looking for period 8? Something like that. Awesome, thank you. So it does have a generator in there, but I think the idea that you had about making it so that you have some sort of ideas that to go off of, some, I don't know if it's like something like drawing out of a hat, like here's a place to start from. But I think that there's some room for exploration there. So that's a great idea.
Yeah, I'd like to pick you up on something you said about the future of juggling could be involved in inside and outside. Could you just explain that a bit more? Like what does it mean to be inside and outside when you're juggling?
Oh yeah. I was talking about actually inside versus outside hands. And that refers to, well, sort of like we're side by side right now in this stream. And so this is my inside hand. This is my outside hand. So, and it's just a different way of thinking about hand order, because if we want our inside hands to throw after each other, it would actually be my right and then your left. So slightly different hand order. So that's what I meant by inside and outside versus, I don't know if you thought indoors or outdoors. That could be a whole nother discussion on preferences there. I like to juggle indoors, actually. So that's the slight difference in the wind can really affect your juggling pattern, believe it or not. So.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I think table juggling seems like a really accessible way into juggling. What are there other kind of ways in that you'd recommend? Like if someone wanted to start juggling, like me, for example, they weren't very coordinated. What's a good way to sort of start from scratch?
Oh, good question. Good question. Well, good news is that most people are not coordinated when they get started learning to juggle. So the good news is that that's it's very it's you can get past that. And so, juggling on the table, we did this just a little bit one time, Alex, but
Yeah.
there's a fun way that you can with three balls or three of any object, you can do the table juggling with yourself. And that's one way to make it accessible. Another way, as you're learning, I think it's really nice to be able to focus on just one hand at a time. So if you have a supportive friend or family member nearby, then it can be really nice to do side-by-side juggling where, again, if we're side by side here, I would use my outside hand. You would use your outside hand, and we would juggle a three-ball pattern together. And so I think that's a nice way to be able to just dissect it. You are only trying to do half of the pattern at a time, and it can be nice to get into the rhythm of it. The other thing I will say, if anybody out there is wanting to learn to juggle or feeling inspired after this, um, learning to juggle over a table or a bed can be very nice because if you're juggling in the air and you drop, it's just going to land on the bed. You don't have to reach all the way down to the ground and hurt your back. So a few ways there to make learning to juggle a little bit more accessible. But I've also seen cases where kids are really interested in learning to juggle, either doing solo juggling or passing. And it really speaks to them from a rhythmic or a pattern perspective, and that speaks to them, but they're too young to have the coordination to really be able to throw and catch, actually, or maybe even too small to be able to handle enough props in their hands to be able to accomplish, some patterns. And so this is, a way that I've seen people, under age 14, for example, be able to do some more complex rhythmic based and pattern based juggling stuff without being able to um, physically do it yet. So, yeah.
Yeah, we talked briefly before about maybe running a more hands-on session at some point. Maybe we could do that.
Yeah.
Do the algorithmic pattern thingy.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
Maybe we have time today too if we want to. Probably everybody has three objects, and we could do some table juggling together if we have some time.
Yeah, we could do. Maybe it'd be nice to sort of give people a bit more warning, and yeah, but soon would be really good. But yes, a more technical question, I guess. Often in pattern making, you talked about transforming patterns, going from one to another. So maybe this is related to that, sort of transitions between patterns, like if you're knitting something and going to a different gauge, there's a whole other level of pattern, which is how you can do that while making a smooth transition. So how do you go from one Siteswap to another without ending up with balls on the floor? Is that kind of a big issue for juggling, or?
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, I think similar to knitting, there's quite a few places in a juggling pattern or with a particular juggling pattern where you would get into an alternate state. So I mentioned state diagrams. There's kind of a ground state, and then there's excited states. And so you can get into an excited state with a pattern such that you need to have like an outgoing sequence that would get you back into a ground state so that you could get back into a standard juggle. And similarly, you might need an introductory throw to get into an excited state Siteswap. And so and those are pretty confusing for me. I've learned how to do them on my hands so that you can figure out what transition throw is needed to get to back to the ground state or back to a 3, for example, if that's what you're going to. But yeah, that definitely happens. I'm not sure what else, how better to sort of explain what that looks like in juggling. But maybe it would, the example that someone gave to me recently, it would be a pattern called a shower, where you're throwing continuously in one hand, and those throws are a little bit higher, and so that gets you into an excited state where, because of those high throws, you kind of end up having a gap, and it is accounted for numerically, but it's an excited state, and so to get into it, you have to throw a special throw to 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 get into that excited state. So, and then to get out of it, there's basically like a pause while you wait for the higher throws to come back down, and so that's kind of an easier transition. That's pretty smooth. Um, but yeah, most of those transitions that I know of are just 1 or 2 throws, but I'm guessing that there's cases where it would be a lot more transition throws that would be needed. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else was I going to ask? Yeah, about improvisation, I think. Actually, there was another thing I was going to ask before that, which was about audience and audience comprehension. Like when you get really deep into these patterns, what do you think the audience thinks? Or is this something where the audience, for complex site swaps, would you only really inflict those on other jugglers? Or do you think there's something that a naive audience who doesn't know what these numbers mean, doesn't understand all the interactions between the balls,
Yeah.
do you think they get something more from a more complex juggling pattern?
Yeah. I think generally, I guess the answer for me is maybe a little bit sad, but I think generally from an audience perspective, they're not probably gonna be able to see the difference between some of the complex site swaps. And I think you can really see that, in play. I think a lot of people have probably seen some sort of juggling performance, either as a street show maybe, or in a circus or something like that. And probably what you've seen more of is people juggling more objects, as something that's more impressive, or juggling dangerous things, or, inflicting humor instead of math, maybe. And so I think that's a more common way to approach a performance, or, showing juggling to an audience, because even some of the patterns that I showed in the video, if you're looking at it, for example, side by side, it's really even hard to tell which hand is catching the ball. And so a lot of these site swaps would look exactly the same from from an outsider's perspective. Even, a juggler might look at 2 patterns and not be able to really see the difference. And so I think a lot of times the answer is that this sort of juggling is just a lot more niche, and something that is explored, in special cases, special shows, or, amongst jugglers, or more theoretically. But I will say there's some really amazing, notable examples of people who are groundbreaking in that regard. So for anyone who's interested in how Siteswap can be used in a really entertaining and artistic way, I would suggest looking at Gandini juggling. So that's spelled Gandini, Gandini juggling. And they do amazing work with their performances, and it's very heavily Siteswap based. And Sean Gandini has done a lot to spread knowledge of Siteswap as well. So definitely a good place to see really artful Siteswap in action.
Nice. Yeah, I guess that's part of the future of juggling, sort of finding out ways of kind of getting that complexity across. In my one of my fields, algorithmic music, we try to project our code so that people might have some insight into what's going on. Whether that really obfuscates it more, I'm not sure. But I think there's a whole kind of area of research finding out how to allow people access to the joy of these patterns. I mean, we say that they're really complex, but when you look at that sequence of numbers, it's like 6 numbers. So there's something really fundamentally simple about it, which is something that B.C. Manjanath was talking about Carnatic music. So it seems like there's kind of a fundamental aspect of this stuff which is understandable. It's just finding ways of getting it across, maybe.
Yeah, I think that there's ways that people can relate to juggling some of these patterns a little bit more when they have an object to track as well. I've seen some fun, a lot of fun work in, for example, the table juggling style, where people replace one of the juggling balls with a fun object. Like I've seen a lot with a bottle of wine. And so that bottle of wine gets passed around amongst all of the people. And so that's a fun way, I think, that you can start to bring context to it, just to have, more common objects that people have associations with. And then, then you see the pattern and you see the object moving and you have more to relate with it. So just one other idea that I've seen people playing with. So, yeah.
I've been asking other questions. I should really share some from the chat. So Nokia says, I'm curious about the sand forms and what spawned that idea. It's a very unique way of interpreting patterns. There's something very nice about showing time in the paths and how they're made, and then they're overwritten, they're wiped. And then you just shake the table at the end to wipe the slate clean. Something very nice about that.
Yeah, it is really pleasing. It's really fun with the sand. It also is, it makes a nice sound, and the texture of it is really fun. So there's just a lot more with the sand than with normal juggling. There's just a lot more senses that are part of it. So, but the original idea, it really for me started from the table juggling, and I noticed that a lot of times that the balls were in contact with the table the whole time. That we were able to do that with certain numbers and certain sequences. So when I started picking up on that once we took gravity out of it, we could really just show the arc of each ball. And so then sand was just such a great medium for that. I think that another way of getting into that space is with light tracking. So I've seen people do that with videos and like an LED glow object, and you can see the trail of the light. And so that's sort of another way that I've seen people do, where they sort of leave the pattern of juggling visible after the objects have been caught. And so the sand just it was just almost random how that came about for me. So yeah.
Just one more comment. I can't resist sharing this tower bell ringing, change ringing. Have you heard of connections between juggling and change ringing?
No.
Seems like I've got a book here. Change ringing. I'll show you a diagram. Yeah, it's really mathematical. This kind of thing. It was just tables of numbers and similar diagrams to you. Maybe there could be some kind of collaboration between bell ringing patterns and jugglers. It's quite amazing stuff.
Oh, fantastic. Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks, Alex. I'm glad that you have that book just sitting next to you. So
yeah, it's in my pattern library. I haven't tried it myself, but yeah. There's so many of these little kind of mathematical art forms to explore. Yeah, it's nice we should get more and more of these pattern people together and share their numbers.
It's such a unique opportunity. So
yeah. Thanks so much, Bekah. It's been super interesting. We'll try and organize a more hands-on session as well, so we can get involved in some table juggling. and I hope to be able to cook some lasagna for you in the future to say thank you for this. And yeah, check the other talks on algorithmicpattern.org and check the events page for future events. And yeah, thanks everyone. Take care. Bye.